Yeah.
Welcome to the most overrated, underappreciated, most viewed, underviewed podcast of all time. Welcome to the Prince of Fresh Air. I'm, of course, your host, the beloved, the most charismatic man in entertainment. Now, this is impromptu. We're throwing a little curveball here, but I'm really excited and appreciative to have this guest on. Today was a highs of highs. I got to audition for a new Adam Sandler project, so looking forward to that. But this guest right here, he doesn't need any introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway because he deserves it. And who am I interviewing? Well, if you follow UFC, if you follow combat, you know Conor McGregor, you know John Jones, you know Israel Adesanya, but you will know this man right here, Kevin Iole. Now, who is Kevin if you don't know? Well, allow me to introduce him for you if I can. So Kevin has been doing this for 4 decades, so longer than I even been a thought in this earth. But he's one of the most respected journalists in the business, and he graduated with his BA in journalism and communications from Point Park College, and he was elected into the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame in 2014, and he's won numerous state sports writer of the year multiple times, and as well as awarded the National Sports Writers and Sportcasters Association Awards. This man has been a legend. He's an icon in the sport. And you also might know him for his recent, I would say, argument with Dana White. But we'll cover all of that. Please help me introduce Kevin Iole. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Perse. How are you? I appreciate having me on. That was quite the introduction.
I got to do right by the guest. Everybody's tired of hearing me talk, but it's not about me. It's about you. Kevin, like I said, you've been doing this for 4 decades. So you've seen the lows, you've seen the highs, and you don't really need the soft intro. So let's just jump right into it. You've been doing this for a long time, and I do want to ask you because I got involved with MMA during my early college years, so around 2015. And the sport has changed since when it first started in the 1990s. For you, how did, because you graduated with your BA in journalism and communications, how did you even find a way to, utilize that avenue that you were pursuing to, translate to MMA and, boxing?
You probably remember these things. Not a lot of people remember them, but I know, Percy, you're sharp. You're going to remember something called a newspaper. And they used to exist long, long ago. And sometimes they got delivered twice a day to your house, believe it or not. Sometimes in the morning and sometimes in the afternoon. But I had grown up in Pittsburgh. I was a huge sports fan. And I grew up in the 70s. I graduated high school in 1977. And Watergate was going on, right? And unlike now, where journalists are reviled by so many people and hated, and the profession is hated, back then, there was a lot of corruption going on in politics, and it was being exposed by mostly newspaper reporters, right? We're digging all this stuff out. And so it was like a cool thing to do. So I love sports, and I knew I wasn't a very good athlete. And I said, how do I have a life in sports and do what I want to do while taking advantage of the skills that I have? And I was in the National Spelling Bee when I was in 5th and 6th grade. I was always good in English. And so I figured, hey, be a sports writer, and journalism was big at that time. And so I went into sports writing, and how I got into combat, I was still in college when I got hired at a small paper in Pittsburgh. So I had a full-time job at a paper, and I was going to school in the day, and then I would go home and then head up to the paper. And mainly what I did was I took calls on high school sports, right, and wrote up, the little blurbs that used to go in the paper. Well, there was boxing, and I love boxing. I was a Muhammad Ali fan. He was my favorite. I idolized Ali. There was boxing at a Howard Johnson's hotel they had a monthly card. And I asked my boss, I said, can I cover those cards? And, he didn't care. So I went over and I covered the cards, and that got me into combat sports. And then, one thing led to another, and it just kept going on. And I made a career out of it, and it's been a great career, and I'm thankful. And a lot of times when I think about what I've done, I say thanks to the person that I got on this wall, Muhammad Ali, because he inspired me to love boxing. And I got into this, in large part because of him. And I adore Muhammad Ali. And I have it on my bio on X that, he's my idol, and he sure is that. And so that was my story.
Wow. Yeah, I I wish I would have grown up in the era. Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali, that was a crazy time back then. But as all things, everything changes. So for you, you've been doing this for a long time. For you, not just journalism, but just combat sports. What is like the biggest change you've seen since like the days of the Royce Gracies to now? Like whether it's the camera work, presentation techniques. What is the biggest growth you think you've seen, at least MMA wise, that you've seen over the last like 20, 30 years?
Well, when I first started doing this, every city had at least 2 newspapers. Big cities like New York and LA, Chicago, they had 4, sometimes 5 newspapers. And mainly when you would go to a press conference, it was all newspaper reporters who were writing for the next day. And now, there's very few newspaper reporters, and certainly in combat sports, they don't cover combat sports hardly at all. And so now you have, people who have a voice like yourself, right? You're not hired by some major corporation and some major media outlet, but you're making your own work. And the tools that we have with the internet and all the other things that have come up have enabled this whole, and it's saved boxing to a large degree, and it's helped MMA. So from 93 to say, 2004, 2005, when the Ultimate Fighter came on, MMA was a really, 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 really niche sport. And it was kept alive by people who were passionate about it. And they talked about it on internet forums, and they had jobs as, who knows what they did. They worked at the grocery store. They were a truck driver, whatever they did, but they loved MMA. So they created a blog and they wrote about it, and they talked about it on forums. And that's how it stayed alive. And now, but you still have a big element of that because you have people, I would say it's more people that aren't classically trained as journalists, that don't have journalism degrees, who are in this because they love MMA and they want to be in, than who do have degrees. And it's great. There's a lot more perspective now out there. And that's what I like, right? I love having different perspectives on things, right? Whether, however you come from, everybody brings their own unique perspective to an event. And when we have different voices out there who think differently, who have different backgrounds, to me, it makes a better product as a whole. We don't have the great writers like we used to have back in the day. There's very few of those anymore. People don't want to read writing. They want to listen to an interview, listen to a clip, and go ahead. So it has changed. I don't want to say for the better or for the worse. It's just different.
Right. And one of the reasons why I wanted to ask you about the current landscape of media and being a journalist is there is a shift. Like you said, the newspapers are kind of magically disappeared, right? And now everything is online content. And we're seeing like this whole debate going on with fellow journalists like yourself with what we call social media accounts, where a lot of times they're posting breaking news, fight things that people like you would know, but they're not providing sources. Do you think that is one of the biggest and hardest things about coverage right now, is the fact that you have so many people with a platform, big or small, who are utilizing their followers and engagement to get clicks, and is ruining whenever you break news, someone else takes credit or whatever the case may be?
Well, as a reporter, I mean, obviously you want to be able to break news, but it's not about you. It's about the story, right? And getting the information to the readers, whether it was in physical form, whether it was online form, or whether it's video form, right? Whatever it would be, it's getting the information to, to the consumer of that information. Back in the day, everybody wanted scoops, but when in the newspaper days, you had to wait till the next day to see if you were the only one that had it, right? Like I might have, hey, Floyd Mayweather's going to fight X fighter, on such and such a date. And then I had to wait to see the next morning, did, somebody else have that story? Right now it's, out. And what we didn't have before is like, there could be somebody who's training at the gym and just so happens to be next to, you name the fighter. And that fighter might tell him, yeah, I'm going to fight, so-and-so at UFC 305. Now they put it out on Twitter. They might have one follower on Twitter, but they just talk to, and so you have to be careful because there's a lot of phony stuff out there, right? And there's not enough vetting of that, but it's also great because it can come from anywhere. Before, it was always going to come from big sources and established brands, and it was going to be the New York Times or the LA Times or the Chicago Tribune or whoever it would be that was going to break that story. But now it could be anybody, and you just never know.
Right. Yeah, it's a catch-22, and I do think a lot of times a lot of people are utilizing social media in a way where it's beneficial for them, but it is kind of ruining the coverage a little bit, because there are certain accounts that I see all the time where they're clearly doing things to get fighters to interact with them,
Right.
so they can either post it or try to get an interview. But we are seeing a lot of like fighters, they have YouTube channels, they have their own thing. Is that like a big problem like going on right now? Or is that just kind of one of those things where when you're like an Israel or John or, a Khan or whatever the case may be, it's like, you get them when you can. And, that's just how the sport goes.
So you saw the Nate Diaz Masvidal press conference when, whatever that guy's name is.
Neon.
He said what he said to Diaz, right? Then somebody last week at the Jake Paul fight tried to say something similar to Mike Perry, and Ariel Helwani, cut it off and didn't allow him to say it. And those are people, they're not journalists, they're getting media credentials, but they're not journalists. They're just there for self-aggrandizement and hey, look at me, right? And I think that's going to go away. People are trying to, but because of the way the platforms are now, they can get in. Before, you used to have to go to the game. Remember you may not even remember this, but there used to be a guy years ago. He would show up on TV on all these sporting events, and he had rainbow colored hair, and he had John 3:16 painted on his front and back, and he would be everywhere. And you would look at the crowd, and and there's the guy, right? And he's in the crowd. And so you used to have to go to the event and be at the event and hope to get on camera and try to figure out where to sit. And now they can apply for media credentials and they get in and they do that crap. And, the problem with doing that is there are a lot of us who make our living doing our jobs, and trying to do it. And so now that guy comes in and he's trying, he's not a journalist, and he's asking something stupid and getting Nate mad. And it might end the press conference. And now we can't get what we need because he's, and that's hurting the fans. That's hurting the promotion. That's hurting us as hey, I'm not saying, I am inclusive. I've always been an inclusive person. The more the merrier, right? But follow the rules of engagement, right? If you go there, and I'm not saying I've never asked a dumb question. We all do. Everybody makes mistakes, and we've all done that. But I've never made that kind of mistake, and I think a legitimate journalist is never going to make that kind of mistake. Where I go out there and I'm saying, hey, look at me, and I'm a bad guy, and and talk smack. Because then at the end of the day, what did he do? He ran away, and so. What are you, right? And I mean, to me, it's just that's garbage, and to do that. So that's pretty much what how I would answer that.
Interesting. Now, let me pull back the curtain. I'm gonna pull a WWE move right now. I want to ask you a couple hot takes going on in the industry, but first, I got to bring up this first topic. Spoiler alert, Kevin. John Jones fan right here. I'll admit it. If John called me, if you ever want to interview anyway. No, that's not the point. But the whole John Jones, Tom Aspinall, especially right now around the current pay-per-view that's about to happen. By the time this comes out, I would have passed. But Tom Aspinall, Curtis Blades, Alex Pereira, those are names that are being thrown out. But everybody wants John Jones to face Alex Pereira, Tom Aspinall. And I mentioned earlier that you got an argument with Dana White recently at one of the press conferences because people were talking about the pound for pound debate. Now, before I give my little 2 cents, I want to ask you, because that did cause a lot of, talking, I wouldn't say controversy, but it did start a conversation of what is pound for pound and how would people define it? So for you, how do you define pound for pound?
Sure. Well, let's go back. when pound for pound really came into vogue was in the 1940s. It always had been in boxing. The heavyweight champion had been considered the baddest man on the planet, the number one guy in the sport. And that hadn't changed for, 50 years of doing fights, right? Then Sugar Ray Robinson came along. And Sugar Ray Robinson was so freaking good. Joe Louis was the heavyweight champion, and Joe Louis was one of the all-time greats. And he's the heavyweight champion. And boxing writers of the day were trying to figure out, how do I tell people how good Sugar Ray Robinson is? Well, the easiest way was relative to Joe Louis, right? He's better than Joe Louis. He's just 60 pounds lighter, right? And that became, so then that got it. And so I try to use it as like a video game, right? So if we say everybody keeps their same skills, but, they're maybe the same size and all the proportions. So John Jones is a great wrestler. He's got, a great reach and great length. So if he were fighting, if we're going to do pound for pound, we're going to compare him to Demetrius Johnson, and they're going to say fight at flyweight. Well, John's still going to be a lot taller and proportionally bigger than Demetrius Johnson, because John's bigger than the average light heavyweight. So whatever division he would be big. Demetrius, is so fast that Demetrius would be faster than John, even if he went up to light heavyweight, right? So that's how I look at it, right? So who would win if everybody, weighed the same and they fought? That is essentially, I think, how pound for pound goes. And it's mostly performance, but it's also sometimes potential, and you got to weigh both. And usually it's got to be, in my opinion, performance up here and potential down there. Sometimes, it gets this way, and sometimes, but the closer to the center you have it, maybe, based on performance being a little bit ahead, I think the better it is.
Interesting. So, yeah, I enjoyed the little, tit for tat that y'all both went on. And I got to say, I agree with Dana in the sense that I think that when you think of who John Jones is and his activity, I know people say, oh, he only fought, once in the last, 4 years. But I do think if you look at skill for skill, he should be number one. Now, like I said, that everybody's, the idea is going to, vary. So I definitely get your point. I know one of the points you mentioned was activity. He's only fought, once in the last 2 years. So why should he be ranked over Islam, right? But, for some people, they might say, well, if you put John Jones and Islam in the room, same way or whatever, John Jones walks out the victor, so he should be number one. And I know Curtis Blades, I know recently at, one of the media days, it wasn't Curtis Blades. I don't want to put anything in his mouth. But one of the fighters currently on the UFC pay-per-view, they were saying how they think the pound for pound thing is crap, because it seems like a lot of times they get it wrong. It's a popularity contest, and how certain people win it, but other people aren't. And so, that's just a whole debate. But for you, I do want to ask you about the whole John Jones and Tom Aspinall thing, because that is still going on to this day, and people keep asking Tom and Curtis about it. Do you think? Because in my heart, I think I hate to say it, but I think John, if he wins in November, he's going to retire. But do you think that John needs to fight Aspinall to make his legacy even more?
No. So let me say this. Let me first talk about why I don't have John Jones rated number one pound for pound on KevinIole.com right now. I think John Jones is the best fighter in the world, but he hasn't been active for 15 months or more than that, 16 months, right?
Right.
To this point. And he's fought once in 4 years. Now, I think there's two debates with John. He's the greatest fighter of all time. I agree with that. I'm on the same side with Dana on that. John Jones is the greatest of all time. Some people say George St. Pierre. Some say Anderson Silva. Some, there's some say Habib. There's a couple people that are in the running, but I think it's John Jones. Best active fighter today. Well, he's not fighting. He's fought once in 4 years. He fought March 5th of 2023, and he hasn't fought since. His fight before that was February of 2020.
Right.
So, it's not fair to the fighters who are going to the post and fighting. So my thing is, I say, okay, you do not fight in a year, or if you're on a drug suspension, then you're ineligible. So when John fights, I'm not going to commit today, then I'm going to put him at number one, because I don't know how he's going to look. Assuming he looks like John Jones, let's say he goes in against Stipe and he, submits Stipe or finishes him, wins a 50-45. I think I say John Jones becomes number one pound for pound. Makhachev drops down to number two because but if John Jones goes in against, Stipe and it's a split decision in favor of Jones, then I say, well, Makhachev is now the better fighter now, not the better fighter of all time, but the better fighter now. But given that John's not fighting, it's not fair to keep him in the rankings for 4 years. And that was the point I was trying to make to Dana. Simple. I was advocating John Jones when Dana was very loudly advocating Anderson Silva. I was saying John Jones is the best fighter in the world. And he was, Anderson Silva. Rah, rah, rah. And there was a lot of people that were saying Fedor. I had in boxing in 2001, I was one of, there was a poll, I think, of 50 writers that was taken. And two people had Mayweather number one pound for pound, me and one other person. And everybody else had either Roy Jones or Shane Mosley. And I thought it was Mayweather. And that didn't mean I was right or wrong, but that was what my opinion was. And my opinion now is that John is the best fighter in the world. But since he's inactive, he has disqualified himself from the current rankings. When he becomes active, then I will consider how he looks at that time. And one last thing on that, I will let somebody go over 12 months without fighting if they have a fight schedule. So when we got to March of 24, that was a year for John. Let's say on March 2nd, the UFC announced, hey, Jones is going to fight Stipe in May. I would have left Jones in my pound for pound rankings because I had him number one. I would have left him in because he had a fight scheduled, even though it was going to be longer than a year. But he doesn't have a fight. Even now, you said he might fight in November. And ask Dana White that question. I agree with you. I think he is going to fight in November. And I also further agree with you, Percy, that I think he's going to retire after that fight if he wins. So I think you're on the money. But that fight is not a done deal yet. Believe me, it's not a done deal.
Yeah, if Dana hears this, Kevin, it's been nice knowing you. So one of the things I want to ask you, sorry, TMZ, broke up the connection there. But anyway, one of the things I want to ask you is, now that we have the 12-6 elbows and, they're going to redefine the grounded opponent rule in November 1st of this year, 2024. One of the things I have kind of noticed, and, a lot of fighters, talk about how they kind of looking forward to the new change because some of the rules don't make any sense. But, one of the things I do agree with, certain people about like wrestlers like Curtis Blades and Jonathan Almeida is people, I think, have gotten so used to the knockouts. They want to see the Justin Gaethje versus Michael Chandler. They want to see the swing and bang like Derek Lewis. And a lot of people, I think, aren't paying attention to the history. And one of the things I want to ask you is because there is a generational shift, if you will. Like my generation and younger are seemingly more trying to get the sport to be more of a stand-up fight. They don't appreciate the wrestlers. They don't appreciate the ground and pound unless you're a Habib and you're smashing your opponent's face in. Do you think that the current trajectory in sports right now in UFC is that fighters are going to be more rewarded to abandon the BJJ and, the ground techniques for more of a stand and swing and bang approach? Because it seems to me a lot of fighters are only really getting the clout and rewards when they're actually standing up and training with each other and knocking each other out.
Well, I think the fighters in the UFC, and this is what Dana instilled and Lorenzo Fertitta instilled, the way they wanted their fighters to fight, and I think it's taken over the entire sport. That's how influential they were, is to take risks. It's not whether you're a stand-up fighter or you're a ground fighter, it's take risks. So if you're, what they didn't want is somebody clinching against a cage. You remember in some of those early UFCs, there would be clinches for, 10 minutes, right? And they're not moving. And that wasn't pleasing to a lot of people. If you were a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fan, you understood what was going on, you saw those moves, you're okay with that. But to a wide audience, most people didn't know what that was, and they still don't know what that is, and they didn't appreciate it, so they didn't want to watch it. So if you fight jiu-jitsu and you take a risk, they're going to reward you for that. That's what they want. They want risky fights, not necessarily. yeah, I think Dana's a stand-up fan. And if Dana, would tell the truth, I think, if every fight was a Justin Gaethje slobber knocker, where guys are just going, going like that. And that's, I don't think, Justin, I am not dogging your side.
Oh, no.
I think if every fight were like that, Dana would die and go to heaven, right? He would be so happy. But I think that they just want fighters who take risks and look to finish. So if you're a jiu-jitsu fighter and you're a submission specialist, try to get a submission, take a risk to get that's what they want, not necessarily to eliminate their skill on the ground or, whatever, but to take a risk to try to get a finish to make it more friendly.
Yeah, you know what? That's exactly right. Yeah, I think it's more like you said, taking the risk and getting those finishes. And I do, but one of the things I will say, and I feel like because of social media, and you was talking about this before, social media has kind of shortened people's attention span. So if you can, Curtis Blades said this recently, people look at some of his losses and say, oh, he got knocked out, he's garbage. But if you watch the fights, and then sometimes a lot of fights are less than 10 minutes, you'll see that I had the technique, I had the skill, I was winning. And it's heavyweight.
Said that to me in my interview with him, right?
Right.
He was winning the fight against Derek Lewis until he got knocked out.
Right.
No, I was going to say to you, I agree with that. Curtis is right. People's attention span is shorter. That's where the slap fighting becomes popular, right? Because you can watch the entire fight on a 30-second clip. Right, you get it out, boom, there it is, and you see it. So social media has gotten that. They want to see the finishes, and you get all that crazy stuff on a short social media clip.
Yeah, Justin Gaethje, I love him. He's one of my favorites too. But everybody ain't gonna fight like that, and I think
right.
Part of the reason some people value their records and legacy, whatever the case may be. Now, we're getting close to time, so I got a couple more things I want to mention. Now, another debate that's going on, I'm sure you get this in your comments, and people reach out to you about this, is people say, hey, you have, and I'm not starting trouble here. This is not, trying to get you, caught. Right? We just got to ask the questions here. People say, hey, Kevin, I like your interviews, but why can't you be like Nina Drama? Why can't you be like these content creators who ask, these fighters, different questions? Because the media asks the same boring questions. How's fight camp? How you feeling? And so what do you say to people like that? Because I do understand from a reporter and journalist standpoint, you have to ask certain questions like that because you never know what's happening with a fighter, right? But what do you say about people who say, hey, the media is boring?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to argue. Like, I think everybody has to be themselves, right? So Nina is my friend, but I'm not Nina. And I have a different personality than Nina, and I have a different perspective. And people come to me for a certain, thing, and they go to Nina for a different thing, right? And people like that. So I don't disagree with that. And like, I'm very critical of myself. One of the problems, and I'll just explain from my standpoint, a lot of times when I get these interviews with fighters, you'll see, so in the past week leading up to UFC 304, I did Arnold Allen, I did Curtis Blades, I did Bilal Muhammad, I did Leon Edwards. So they are doing interviews with maybe 20 people all right in a row. And so they go from 1 to 1 to 1 to 1 to 1. So a lot of times I'm last because the UFC, since I have been around so long, they let me go last, and not always last, but a lot of times, so I can go a little bit longer if I want. Well, what happens? They've been talking and answering the same questions all this time. So now I want to open the conversation. And if I have a personal relationship with somebody, I think my interviews are like, if John Jones, if you go look at interviews I've done with John Jones, really compelling and a lot of different topics, and and it goes good. But now you're talking about a fight week where, I don't personally know Leon Edwards that well. Like, do I know him? Do we know each other face to face? Yes. But do I say I know Leon Edwards as a person? No. So as a result, you're going to, he's done 20 interviews before me. He's got fight week coming up. He's got everything going. And now you're sitting there and he's giving you nothing. But if he gives you a little bit, like in that first answer, and you give it, now you can follow up on it. So I'm not, blaming, I'm not trying to shrug off blame for any poor work that I do, because, hey, I'll accept the blame. I mean, I think the criticism is valid, right? But there's a reason, like, people don't always know what happens, right? So, when whatever somebody else does for a living, there may be a reason, why things go wrong in their job that you and I don't know about, because maybe we're consumers at a restaurant and we don't know why the steak is overcooked or why it's undercooked, or, whatever the case may be. Like, we don't like something that's going on. Well, they don't know what we're doing, but they're willing to share, and they don't know the problems we face. But at the end of the day, it's on us to get the best content. So, that's a fair question to ask. And I think it's a fair criticism. But I also think, remember, everybody has a different perspective, and you're coming from different perspective. And that's why I said at the very beginning, hey, it's great. When I started, there was nobody like Nina out there, right? So Nina now is a funny person, and she has a different way of thinking about it, of things. And she's able to get the fighters in a position where, they have spent a day, being interviewed and asked, hey, what do you think of your opponent? What, who do you want to fight next? Now she's asking them goofy stuff that, and they start laughing and they show their personality. And at the end of the day, that's really, really what, you want to get out of somebody.
Right. Now, I just got two more for you. Now, one of the things I have talked about is trash talk in combat sports, right? And one of the things I always, see about people talking about Bilal, Leon, certain fighters, is that, hey, your personality is kind of boring. And a lot of people don't remember, hey, a lot of times these fighters are cutting weight. So, of course, the energy is going to be, it's going to be depleted. But, when you look at people like Conor, Colby, they always, and Sean Strickland, they may not always, you may not like everything they always say, but at least they get you, hyped up during the press conference, during the media. So I do want to ask you about this, because I feel like, in this society, in this generation, rather, when it comes to fighting, I think that if you are someone who may not be a John Jones in the ring, but your personality is kind of on the Conor McGregor's level, that you get more opportunities than a guy who is like, and this is no disrespect to Curtis, but he even kind of hinted at it, where it's like you do everything right in the ring, but you're not the media darling. Do you agree with that?
Yes, 100%. I mean, the fighters have to sell themselves. They have a product too, right? So my product is writing about the fighters and the fights, and I'm trying to sell my story so that you click on my story, right? And I don't want to be sensational. I want to be accurate, but I want to write something that you want to read. The fighters, they have to get people to want to watch them fight, buy tickets to their fights, buy pay-per-views to their fights, buy their merchandise, right? All those things. That's how they're making their living. So some, but that it goes to the question you just asked me about the media, right? Some people are like Conor, and some people are like Curtis Blades. Some people are like Nina, some people are like Kevin, right? There's different, there's different ways, that it goes. And I think it's just, that's personality. But all the fighters, right, should strive to try to make, their interviews entertaining, and just not even their interviews necessarily, but their social media presence. When because you are selling yourself as a product. And you want to present, and you want to get as many people excited about the product as you possibly can, right? Now, let's use Justin Gaethje, right? Because we talked about him before. Gaethje's a fun guy to talk to, and he gives good answers. But Gaethje doesn't have to do that now, because everybody has a whole library of Justin Gaethje fights, right? So you could just Justin Gaethje go, yeah, whatever, and people are going to want to watch him fight. But there's not a lot of people like that, right? And so Muhammad Makayev, right? He's getting a lot of heat for being boring and not, even though he's a super talented guy, he needs to sell a little bit. He needs to get out there and say to people, hey, now he had the brawl in the hotel. I know this is going to come out of UFC 304, but, he had the brawl in the hotel with Manel Cape. We'll see how that fight goes. But that's the thing, that's the difference. So the fighters themselves, they are the product. They have to sell themselves as a product. So you as a consumer want to buy them and want to watch them, not only this time, but again.
Right. All right. One last thing. This is just real quick, but as you've seen in the intro, I had the pleasure of having the heavyweight champion of Power Slap, Damian DeBell, on. And I give credit to you because I watched the interview with him. I said, the guy, you did a great job. And, this would be a great spotlight to give someone opportunity like him, to do coverage, because it seems to me a lot of the Power Slap guys don't get a lot of opportunities, right? And one of the common things I hear often is, people might say, I don't know if you get this in the comments or DMs, but, people say, oh, Power Slap is stupid. Why are you even covering Power Slap? What are you buddies with Dana? So I do want to ask you just to defend yourself a little bit, because I do watch Power Slap. I'm a fan, but what do you say to people who say Power Slap is stupid? You're just trying to get in Dana's good side. What do you say to people like that?
Well, I didn't cover Power Slap 1 through 4 or 1 through 5. I can't remember which, but it was in that range, right? I agree with that. I said to Dana a million times, like I'll tell one story and then I'll answer that question. So they had a test run. What was it, in 2022? A show, I think it was. Yeah, it was 2022, right? Maybe it was 23. I can't remember the time frame now, but they had a test show. It was in March of whatever year it was. And they invited the Las Vegas media. Now, we were told we weren't allowed to write about it. We weren't allowed to talk about it, but they wanted to be able us to see it and then give our reaction and what the show was. Brett Okamoto was there. John Morgan was there. I was there. Oscar Willis was there. Ken Hathaway. Forget who else. A couple other people. Maybe about 10 reporters that are based in Las Vegas went to the thing. I left at I think there was like 12 fights. I left like maybe after 5 or 6 fights. This isn't for me. And I argued with them about, you can't defend yourself, hands on the back. So then I started learning more about it. I talked to doctors. Okay. Then I started seeing the social media traffic. And why am I at keviniole.com? Why do I write about it? Okay. What convinced me, what put me over the edge was a woman named Amy Kaplan. Amy writes for Fansided. And she had no TikTok account. So she was going to one of the Power Slaps that I did not attend. And she created a TikTok account that night. And she videotaped one of the slaps. And I think she got 1.3 million views on her thing. And I thought about that. I heard it and I said, well, that is what some people want to see. So I decided, hey, I'm going to give this a try and cover it, because I have a new business. I was at Yahoo for 17 years. I got laid off in December. And in January, I started my own website and came back. And I said, I need to do something to attract people to the site. Now I found out that it doesn't get as much traffic for stories as it does for the videos, right? So my main thing is I'm writing stories on this stuff. So I'm not used. You notice I'm not doing a lot of it in between time because there's not a lot of stories to write, right?
Right.
But I did, so that was the reason. So this whole thing, well, you're trying to be buddies with Dana. No, I'm trying to make a living and make my website as successful as possible. And when I saw a fellow reporter got 1 million views on I think it was on TikTok. Yeah, it was TikTok. She put out. I had to say, let me try this. Now, and I did at the first show that I put out. I put a post on Instagram, and I think I have 5,000 followers on my Instagram account. It's not a big account. Right now, I have 1.7 million views on that. Ooh. So, for people who want to know, that's why, right? It's not my favorite sport. I understand people who say it's stupid, right? When I covered it, though, I'm going to also, so I said bad about it. I'll say it was fun, and I've covered 7 fights where a fighter has died. I've been in person, all boxers. That is the absolute worst thing, Percy, you ever want to sit through, right? And that I didn't want to go through it again with this. So I talked to a bunch of doctors about it, and you'll find differences of opinion. But I talked to 6 different doctors, and they all said, hey, we're not advocating anybody get hit in the head in any sport in any way. But if you are if you are into combat sports and you're going to get hit in the head, this way is less dangerous than other sports because you're not getting hit in sparring, right? A lot of the boxers die because they're sparring every day and they're getting hit in the head every day. And then they get hit in the head in a fight and they have a bleed on the brain already. They get in the head, it bleeds again and they pass.
Right.
and they don't spar in power slap. So if you go into a fight, you get hit 1 to 5 times maximum, right? And then that's it. And then until your next fight. And then it's open-handed. It's not a closed fist. You're not allowed to turn, right? So there's a little bit of a turn, but you're not allowed to shift your weight. So you have to stand and throw the slap like that. So those things mitigate. And then when I watched it as a, just fun, like seeing after a fighter takes a slap and he turns to the crowd and he yells and they really engage with the crowd, I got a kick out of it. Is it my favorite thing? No. And would I go to it? Would I go to an MMA card if I was retired today and there was a fight tomorrow? Yes. Would I go to a boxing card if I was retired today and there was a fight on Saturday? Yes. Would I go to Power Slap? No. But having said that, it's fun when you're there, and it was not. So that's my answer, I guess. For better or worse, that's my answer.
Right. And by the way, Kevin, just tell the people you're already buddies with Dana. You don't need to worry about that, right?
Yeah, no, Dana and I knew Dana in the mid 90s. Dana was a young guy then, right? I'm about 8-9 years older than Dana, I think. I'm not exactly sure how old he is right now, but I'm roughly 8 or 9 years older than Dana. But I used to see him around boxing events, right? I would go to Golden Gloves Gym in Las Vegas here to watch Mike Tyson train, and Dana would be at the gym. So, I'm there to see Tyson, but I'd see Dana, we'd shoot the shit. It was before the UFC was just getting started. Maybe in those days, he had nothing to do with it. And I saw him around, a lot. So I got to know him, via that way. And, I have a relationship with Dana, and I'm not apologizing for it. I mean, as a journalist, you're supposed to have sources. Now, have I ever been to Dana's house? Have I ever, done it? No, right? I've never been paid by Dana, nothing. And, but we're friendly. We have a good relationship, but sometimes we've had fights, and the summer of 2017, he was mad at me for something I wrote, and he didn't talk to me for 4 months, right? Or maybe it was 2 months. I can't remember, but it was a long period of time. Like, I remember Amanda Nunes and Valentina. Amanda pulled out of that fight. Remember, she got sick, and Dana told everybody, but he didn't tell me because he was mad at me, right? And I'm texting him, and he's not responding to my text. God, I can't get, and I was, because he was mad at something I wrote. And then, later, before the McGregor-Mayweather fight, all of a sudden he just texted me and he wasn't mad anymore, and we were in. But so, yeah, so I mean, I don't apologize that I have a relationship with Dana, but I would say, that Dana has helped me, certainly. But I have been critical of him when I felt it's been necessary, and so it's a two-way street.
Right. And just to wrap it up, I just want to say a lot of people say Power Slap is stupid, but once Paige Van Zandt joined, all of a sudden I'm seeing the same accounts, very excited. So, that goes without saying. But anyway, Kevin, you've been very gracious with your time. I know you're busy. You got a lot of coverage, a lot of interviews and videos you have to put out. But, I know where to find you, and a lot of people will know where to find you. But just in case, where can people find you, check out your content, all that good stuff?
Well, the number one spot, go to keviniole.com, and it's on the screen, KEVINIOLE.com, and you can see that. My YouTube channel is youtube.com/KevinIole. I am on X at Kevin I, so Kevin and then the letter I, and then Instagram and Facebook at Kevin Iole.
Now, Justin Gaethje might be the highlight, but Kevin Iole is the GOAT. And, if this is pound for pound list, he will be number one in the journalist category. So thank you, Kevin. I appreciate the time. And like I always say, a helping hand is a better hand. Go check out Kevin, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah.